Why am I even doing this? All right. And what's up? Hey everyone. It's your boy. We got another lecture in here. We missing people? Let's see what we got. Head count. I don't know how many we're supposed to be, but it looks pretty close. Y'all know each other. One's missing. I can't believe it. Oh, but they're like here. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll start off slow. What's up? Hey. Oh man, you're all back. That's cool. I guess I didn't scare you off. Every new cohort, I consider the idea of like getting fake tattoos, like a semicolon or something. But I haven't done it yet. Yeah, so one of these days I'm gonna put on like a whole character and stuff. But yeah, how'd you like your first day? How was it? Had a good time? Yeah. Good stuff? All right. Are you looking forward to day 2? Nice. There are plenty more of these. So do I have more days of coding for you? Today's gonna be another one of those days that has a breakout, but today's breakout's gonna be pretty short. When I say short, I mean it'll be like 50 minutes as opposed to an hour and 45. But today's lecture is going to be another one that's about process, right? Another one that's about working through things, except what we're doing today is I'm actually going to be writing like JavaScript code. I'll be breaking down in a second what today's goals are, but heads up, warning, today's lecture is going to be moving at a glacial pace, right? In the first half of the lecture, I'll be moving really, really slowly. And if you find that I'm not moving slowly enough, just tell me and I'll move even slower, right? I want this lecture to move at like a pace where all of you feel annoyed with me in the first half, and then in the second half, I'm gonna turn up the heat a little bit, right? So usually, the way I like to start my lectures, I mean, you're gonna have all kinds of lectures. KV's over there. What's up, KV? KV starts his lectures with a joke. I start my lectures by just zooming in and out of things really fast just to make sure that the zoom's working. And then often, what I like to do is I like to just give you an overview or like a quick overview of what's going on in Compass. Because this is the beginning of the day. Hey, you know, maybe you haven't taken a look yet. Maybe you have and you've just missed a thing or two that I'd like to point out. Compass is cool. Brewed in-house. This is fine artisanal software. And what we have here are all kinds of handy dandy little tools. First one, is KV gone? Okay. This is not public, but you might find this useful. If you go to Compass/activities, right? So there isn't like a link that takes you to this. I actually just found out about it the other day. If you go to /activities, there is a search, and you can search for things. So you can search for things like React, right? And you can search for things like React, and it will show you all the stuff that, all the assignments, all the lectures, all the quizzes that have to do with React, right? So that's going to be at the link /activities, right? The reason we don't have a button to it is because the search can be sometimes kind of buggy. You've been warned, but hey, you might find it kind of useful, right? Hot tip. Here's another hot tip. When you're looking at a particular like lecture, so here we are in week 1, day 2. If I go and I look at today's dev workflow, you can look at this ahead of time. Like you always have access to that entire week's stuff. And then on, I think Monday, it unlocks everything for the next week. I mean, you get access to seeing things like, you see the goal for that day's lecture, right? you don't see the teacher notes. These are the things that give me job security. The fact that you don't see this stuff and I slowly tell it to you over the course of 2 hours. But what you also have access to down at the bottom is previous lectures by other lecturers. So right now, like 8 minutes ago, Dominic finished a lecture in Montreal and posted lecture notes. Right? So you can go view and you can see Dominic's lecture notes. Dominic's lecture might be a little bit different than mine. Right? So you might appreciate seeing somebody else's notes. Or David Mills's lecture from 40 minutes ago. If you want to see me, but like, again, like a month younger, here I am, 28 days ago, and my lectures have videos. Right? If you go far back enough, I've been doing this one for a while, but like, here's KV's one from 5 months ago. This is for every single lecture of bootcamp. Right? So if you want to watch a lecture that's like today, you want to see a lecture on Thursday, you can go ahead and you can see those lectures. That's cool. And you can see all the notes. You know, same with like, if, you know, the impossible happens and one of my lectures isn't that good, like you can, I won't be offended. You can go and you can take a look at, skim through other people's stuff. Right? Or if you want just like a different point of view on things. Right? It's especially useful, I think, in the like beginnings of new languages, like when you start React or when you start HTTP, right? When you start those big concepts, it might be useful to just like spend a couple minutes skimming through somebody else's lecture or somebody else's notes to give yourself like a multi-dimensional understanding of stuff. So there you go, hot tip. I usually start off my lectures also by showing you the goal of the lecture, and we're going to be working off of this goal. Now, today's thing is called the dev workflow, right? The dev workflow. Yesterday was life as a dev for our breakout. You are now officially like, you know, you're part of the life as a dev. How did you find day one? Was it tough? Was it easy? It was very difficult. Well, you're gonna get stronger and stronger. Like, you probably already have like calluses from typing so much. Yeah, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there, right? I do want to stress, you know what? Maybe I'm gonna start writing notes for this part here. I want to stress a couple things that you should take advantage of as you're working your way through bootcamp. So let me go zoop and make this a little bit bigger. Sweet. Is the font on the terminal big enough for people? Right? Again, if things are ever too small or whatever, just let me know. Also, feel free to rearrange yourselves. That's cool as well. So, what we're doing today is week 1, day 2. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new directory. 1, day 2. We'll call it lecture. Week 1, day 2, lecture. And in here, the typical thing that I do when I start like a lecture is I might make it a Git repo, right? So I'll go Git init. I'm going to do this just because as I work through it, I want to like make commits and work my way through it. I already actually have the lecture, like all the code and stuff that we're writing already put into a Git repo that I'll send you. But what I'm going to try to do as I work through this is make a good habit of making commits at good milestones, right? So you can see what that workflow is like. I've made this this folder, the week 1, day 2 lecture, and what I want to do is now open up my folder. So Lighthouse, week 1, day 2 lecture. Wow, opened up a folder, super cool. We saw how to do that yesterday. I'll make a file, and this file is going to be called readme.md. readme.md and zoop. Okay. So, week 1, day 1, the dev workflow, plus a short discussion on Markdown. So, I want to start off by saying, like, when you're working through particular things, like particular issues in your code, in bootcamp, and this is like a bootcamp thing. Bootcamp is supposed to move really fast. So I don't want you to expect yourself to understand absolutely everything that happens this week, right? Because bootcamp's gonna cycle back on itself multiple times. There's a tendency that people really get into where they want to slow down and understand everything as they work through. And that's cool if you were learning on your own. But the thing is, that pace just won't work here. It just won't work. So what we're going to need you to do is trust the system, right? Just go with the flow. If you find yourself, if you're stuck on something for more than 15 minutes, ask for help. Ask for help. If you were learning on your own, you have to crush your way through things and do a ton of research and learn by trial and error, right? That's cool, but it takes a long time. What we have here are the mentors, right? The idea here is kind of like a leapfrog situation where you run into issues, you ask for help, a mentor is going to come by and leapfrog you forward, right? And you will learn from that leapfrogging. You can take notes. You might run into that issue again. But the thing is, like, the amount of time that you spend being stuck and unproductive is going to be, like, minimized. That only works. It only works if you make assistance requests, right? So 15 minutes, set yourself a timer. What we're going to be working through today is the process of, like, what you should be doing for those 15 minutes where you're stuck, right? And then at the end of it, I might ask for help, right? But this here, important. Can we all agree on this? So if I hear anybody say, like, man, today was a hard day at boot camp. I worked for 3 hours on that little thing there. It's like, cool, good for you, but that's not what you're supposed to do, right? You should ask for help, and that'll propel you forward. There's going to be plenty of time in your life to be stuck on things for days and days on ends. Boot camp is not that. So I am going to work through a sort of like sizable JavaScript demo, and I want to make a note here that says, for demo purposes, do not worry too much about the actual code that's being written. Right, so I might write some code that you're familiar with. I might write some code that you're not familiar with. Right? If you have questions about it, that's great. Ask, right? And we'll try to talk through it. But at a certain point, what I really want you to focus on is my process for Googling things and for debugging things. That's what I'm working through today. So we'll have a short discussion on Markdown, the itinerary. Well, we'll say goals. Is one, brief Markdown discussion. And then the other goals are coding iteratively and incrementally. Coding iteratively and incrementally. And then how to debug, manually testing code, and last but not least, writing clean code. So all these things right now, how to debug. All these things right now, they're just words, but we're going to play around with a bunch of things and then tie back to here. If I was to sum up today's lecture in a sentence or a question, it's how do we build towards the solution in an ideal manner? Right. How do we build towards the solution or a solution in an ideal manner? Okay, so first of all, Markdown. Markdown is really just a way to write text files so that they look pretty. They're good for notes. Markdown also happens to have like specific kind of rules so that if you're using Markdown in a text editor like this, and it's called, like the text file is called .md, then your text editor is gonna like highlight or color particular things. That's really it. It's just text. It's not a programming language. What it'll let me do is do things like, here's a heading 3 because I put 3 pound signs. Right? And visually to me, this heading 3 like that just looks different than this one here. What do you think this is called? It's a heading 2, right? So you can make headings to say like, oh, this thing is more important than something else. Here's another one. I am a list. It's a list. There's not much I can say about it. Numbers for lists. Great. You can have numbered lists or indentation in lists for sublists, right? Just a nice way for like when you're taking notes, you might want to use something like Markdown, and I'll show you the benefits of it in a second. Things like if I'm writing code in my notes, what I would like to do is have it look different than the rest of my text. So if you use 3 backticks and then a new line and then 3 backticks, everything that you write inside of here is code, or like it gets formatted as code. So console.log hello. And if you say up here what language it's supposed to be, like it is JavaScript, then Sublime is going to color this like JavaScript, which is nice, right? It's just going to be useful for you if you want to keep little snippets of code peppered in with notes and stuff like that. This works with Python. So Python would be print hello, and it's just a different programming language. Among these things are like, if I'm writing out a command like remember to use cd to change directories, you can do a single backtick inline like this to have like code inline. And what we're going to end up with when we use Markdown, which I'll give you a cheat sheet for, right? It's just a bunch of different little rules that you can use to write your notes, is that when you write your documentation in Markdown and you put your stuff up on GitHub, GitHub will render the Markdown by like default to make it nice. So here is, for example, somebody's documentation that they've written in Markdown, and it ends up looking pretty. It's got all these little pictures. It's got links. Look at all this code. Whoa. Links in a list, right? Just neat stuff that you can do. Right? So as part of, and see, this is what H2s end up looking like, right? So eventually, you might write documentation in Markdown to make it pretty. The real benefit of Markdown is that you're writing it in the same text editor that you're writing your code in. So instead of having you write your notes in like Evernote and then having to like just context switch and go over there, you can use Sublime to keep your notes in there. Does that make sense? Right? It's cool stuff. Among the things that you can do, you can put in I am a link, HTTP somelink.com. Right, and then this will just get rendered as a link. I'll give you, again, a nicely formatted cheat sheet, but it's something that I recommend doing as an exercise as you work your way through. Again, for your projects, we're going to require you to like write documentation for and take screenshots and make your like things sort of pretty. So it's a good way to practice that. Are there any questions about Markdown? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not as far as I know. That's a good question. If I did console.log hello, and then over here I did like JavaScript, nah, not to my knowledge. But the thing is, like, yeah, like the thing is, if you're gonna be writing out a bunch of code, you might as well make it a block. What I tend to use this stuff for is if I'm writing like a single command. Right? Like remember to use CD or whatever, like that kind of stuff. Sweet. So there you go. One thing down out of 5. But the fun thing about these other 4 is that they're going to be merged together in one big mash. Now, I'm going to the meat of the lecture area. The meat of the lecture. This is going to be like heads up. With this lecture, I'm going to be coding along. Not coding along. I'm going to be coding a big thing, and I don't want you to code along, right? I don't want you to code along, but I do want you to take notes. If you feel like that helps you, you can make notes of things like, oh, Nima used function, like some kind of function. There, I'm going to show you in a second. How does that work? Right? Maybe you can make a note to yourself to like research something later, or you know, that kind of stuff. Or oh, Nima used this website. Maybe I should go check that website out. So the way that this demo is going to work is that I will have a problem. I'll have a problem statement, and today's problem statement is going to be immediately almost indecipherable. Write a node program that takes in an unlimited number of command line arguments, goes through each, and then prints out the sum. It almost sounds like something that you pull out of a textbook, right? Write a node program that takes in an unlimited number of command line arguments, goes through each, and then prints out the sum. Skip any non-whole numbers, but do support negative numbers. Okay, so it's a mash of words, some of which I might understand. Like, I know what write means, and I know what number means, but I might not, like, maybe I don't know what node program means, or maybe I don't know what command line argument means, right? We haven't done this in the bootcamp yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way through finding the solution to this step by step. I'm going to be working on this in an incremental manner. And what incremental is going to mean is I'm going to build this up slowly, bit by bit, and iteratively. And what iteratively means is I will go through, and then I will loop back again and redo it to make it better and better, right? Maybe my first solution won't be like a complete solution, but it'll get me halfway there. And I'll have to loop over it again and do it. So the first thing that I like to do approach-wise in something like this is break this down into statements. So I can start identifying what the actions that it's asking me to do are, even if I don't fully understand like what the actual question is just yet. I can make my way through this slowly and kind of grammatically start breaking things. Write a node program. Cool. Takes in an unlimited number of command line arguments. Cool. Goes through each. Cool. Prints out the sum. Neat. Skip any non-whole numbers. Do support negative numbers. I've got a bunch of different things that I can technically tackle one by one. Right? Even if I don't understand what's actually going on, right? By identifying just the structure of the sentence, said, okay, write a node program. That's a command in and of itself. I have to write a node program. And I turn each of these into kind of directives that I have to, boop, boop, boop. That's not the right one. Wham. Goes through each, skip any non-wholes, and do support negative numbers. And I can start attacking each of these points bit by bit. Now, I have this kind of checklist. I'm going to keep this checklist for myself. I will refer to. But I think it's useful to do this this process with really every single question that you get, right? Over the course of the entire bootcamp. So look at it, break it into components, and say, okay, like which parts of this do I understand and which don't I? Now, usually when you're given a problem, you're also given examples of how to use your solution in like when it's complete, like some test cases. So the problem set that I give you might not just be a bunch of text like this, but it might say, hey, example input and example output. And these are important. So for example input, I'm just going to tell you right now that the example input is going to be something to the tune of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the example output will be the sum of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is 6, 10, 15. Woo, math. Right? I want to be able to sum all of these numbers. And say I had other numbers like 1, -1, 1, -1, 1. This one here should be 1. Because it goes 1, -1, +1, -1, +1. And I might also have 7, 0.5, and 10. And this should give me 17. Because my program is supposedly supposed to skip any non-whole numbers. Okay. So you'll often be given example inputs and example outputs. But something that you should also strive to do in order to make sure that you fully understand a problem is come up with my own inputs and outputs. Okay. So my own inputs and outputs, I might make a whole bunch of other ones of these, right, on top of the ones that have been provided. So, for example, I'm just going to do a bunch of more of these whole number ones, like 2, 2, 5 is going to give me 9. And then we'll say 10 and 12 and 5 is going to give me 27. Yes. And now I'm confident that I've understood what the problem's supposed to be. I want you to be bored with the question before you start it, right? I want you to know it inside out from what the input and the outputs are supposed to be. Does this process make sense to people? Right? I'm not actually writing any code yet, right? In fact, realize that me breaking this thing down into bits doesn't involve any programming, just breaking it down by grammar. Now that I have some inputs, I have some outputs, both the examples and the ones that I've made, and I have basically a checklist of things that my program's supposed to do, I can start from the very first part of it, which is write a node program. Now, I like to be a little cheekier than starting by actually doing the first thing that the problem tells me to do. I like to imagine that I already have the solution pre-built. So something that I'm going to do over the course of this is I'm going to run code that doesn't exist yet, and I'm going to go, oh, snap, it didn't work. Well, no, I didn't write any code yet. So I'll tell you that, as part of these inputs, the way that, this program is supposed to be run, right? I'll just tell you this, and it would be in the problem, in the problem statement, is that the project is supposed to be run as node sum.js and then a bunch of numbers. Right? This is how it's supposed to run. So I should be running node sum.js yada yada yada, and then I should get 15, 1, or 17, and same with my own inputs like this. So in theory, I can expect myself maybe to go directly in my terminal and go node sum.js 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I cross my fingers. I'm like, please give me 15, please give me 15. Didn't give me 15, right? It didn't give me 15, but it gave me something pretty useful, right? It gave me something pretty useful. It gave me an error. Now, we talked about errors yesterday. I said that your computer tends to be really dramatic. It'll be like, fatal, I can't do it. This is fine. It says, hey, you know what? There's an error. When you tried to run this, I couldn't find the module vagrant week 1 day 2 sum.js. What does that mean? The file doesn't exist, right? It can't find it. All right, fine. Can't find the file. I'll go ahead and I'll make it. I can even do it from the terminal. Touch sum.js. And now technically I've done something. And I can go node sum 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I go, please give me 15. Please give me 15. Didn't give me 15. But I don't have the error anymore. Right? And that's a good thing. I don't have the error. I am huge on just committing all the time. So here I might even go, hey, git add some.js, right? Git commit made an empty some.js file. Right? And you know why I did that? Because I technically solved the first thing here of write a node program. That's really all that a node program is. It's just a file called .js. It's a node program. Check. Oh, where'd you go? Check. Right. I've got myself a file. I've written a node program. It doesn't really do what I wanted it to do, but I can work my way towards it now. Okay. What is the easiest way for me to, when I get node some.js 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I want this to console log 15, right? I want 15 to be printed to the screen. What's the easiest way for me to solve this problem right now? Console.log 15, yeah. So I go into my some.js, console.log 15, woo! All right, run it. Yes, I can go home now, all right? Solution, found it, great. And then you call over a mentor and you're like, hey, can I go home now? I'm done. And they're like, all right, well, what about, 1, 2, 3? This is supposed to give us 6. And I run it, and I get 15. Man, there's a bug in my code, right? I want you to do like the minimal amount of work to solve a problem within reason. Right? This is why we have many little test cases to play with, because, and you're going to find yourself running into this kind of situation kind of by fluke. You're going to think you've solved the problem, but you've possibly only been testing the thing on like one test case. Like every time you run your code, you're like, okay, and it was giving you out 12, 10, 6, and now it's 15. And you're like, yes, all right, commit, submit, I'm done. But you need to remember to check the other test cases, which is why we have this whole checklist of stuff to play around with up here. Okay. Now, obviously, I can't just have this work for the case of 15. So I'm going to have to be a little cleverer. I'm going to move my way down here. The next thing that I need to do is to take in an unlimited number of command line arguments. Now I have a choice here. I don't know what command line arguments are. I have no idea. Maybe, right? I just don't know what they are. I could either spend time like researching this and understanding what it is, or I could ignore it and pretend I know. Right? I could say, hey, you know what? Let's just pretend that the numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4. Whoops, not like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'll just make them an array, and then I'll deal with whatever command line arguments are later. Yeah, I can do that. I'm not going to do that for this lecture. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to work through every step in sequence. But know that like the process that I'm going through today, it's not the only process. So something that I want you to do, especially in the first couple weeks, is to play around with your strategies for figuring out what problems are, right? Figure out what is most efficient for you. And it won't always be the same thing, right? You'll build up kind of heuristics and your own intuitions over time. Now, I'll tell you that command line arguments are these things. Generally, in your terminal or in your command line, anything that you write on the command line is called a command line argument. Right? Every one of these things, node, some.js, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All these things are called command line arguments. I care about the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what I care about. And I want to get those numbers. Now, I just don't know how to do the code for that. I know that what I want to do is take in command line arguments. So I'm going to go to Google And I'm going to treat Google kind of like how you might see like my grandpa use Google, I guess. Like, hello Google. How do I get command line arguments from Node.js? Thank you. Thanks. Right, just hello. And then I'll write a thing, and in a second, what? How do I pass command line arguments to a Node.js program? Whoa. So here's a hot tip. If you phrase your Google searches like questions, right? In programming, like this tends to get you the best answers. Because the thing is, other people will have asked these questions in the form of questions. I tend to find that this is just the fastest way to Google things. You don't have to go hello Google. Like you can get rid of this stuff, and you'll still get how do I pass command line arguments. Now, among the websites that pop up when you Google things are going to be a couple kind of usual suspects. So, Google tip. Number one, Google in the form of a question. And two, these are the usual suspects for good kind of like responses, answers. So the usual suspects are Stack Overflow, right? Stack Overflow, documentation, and then blogs, etc. Generally, like as soon as I Google this stuff here, we're going to go back one to the page I was at. I got Stack Overflow, which I'm going to open up. I got humanwhocodes.com blog 2018. All right, sure, let's see what that is. And then I got nodejs.org. I'm going to make my way through this kind of stuff here. Over in Stack Overflow is kind of like your question answer sort of website. It's the Yahoo Answers of programming, where somebody will have asked a question, people will have voted it up or whatever, and then people underneath will have answered, and there will be many, many answers. Generally, just pick the one with the highest votes, or the highest number, or the one that's got a green check mark next to it. You should be fine when you're starting off. Right? Stack Overflow is my favorite place to start for when I'm looking things up, when I'm starting to learn a language like this, right? Or when you're starting to learn a code. Because the things on Stack Overflow tend to be phrased, right, in a way that's like speaking to a human being, right? They're explaining something to a human, somebody's got a question, right? And this person here is explaining it to that person. I would, for right now, stay away from weird blogs and stuff, like Human Who Codes or whatever. Just stay away for like the next week or 2 weeks, right? There's usefulness in this, but I tend to find that like the quality of blog posts and Medium posts that you'll find varies, right? So don't gamble on it right now. And then there's documentation, or the stuff that's written by the actual people who've made that thing that you're using. Now, the Node.js documentation is probably the best place to get your answer in terms of like completeness of answer. But the thing is, right now, documentation is going to be really terse. Let me do this. Command line arguments, Node.js. Where are you at? Node.js. There you go. So eventually, like, if you were to follow the documentation, you would find yourself to a page that looks like this about the command line arguments. And it's just this really terse document with text and text and text and text and text and text. Right? And it technically has all the information that you need, but it's going to be impossible to read right now. So if I was to put these things in like an order of what you should be attempting to find your answer in, it should be Stack Overflow first for right now, then documentation, and then blogs and other stuff. This is at, like, I'll say the first 2 weeks of bootcamp is this. And then after, for like the rest of your life, I would recommend to switch it around like this, and you put documentation above. Right? There's tons of value in that, but just give yourself like the first 2 weeks to just get acquainted with like the language that people talk in. Yes. Yeah, so W3 School is great. So W3 Schools. This website is great. What this is going to fall under for me is halfway between, Stack Overflow and documentation would be W3 Schools, and the Mozilla Developer Network, which I'll show you in a second. Right? And it's halfway in between because these are technically documentation that's been written in a really beginner-friendly way. Right? So yeah, I do recommend looking at that, and that's actually something we're going to dive into in a second. Good question. So I want to find out how to deal with these command line arguments things. I've Googled it. I've found this particular Stack Overflow post. I'm going to look at the question and make sure that it's actually talking about the thing that I want to talk about. This person's saying, hi, I have a web server written in Node.js. I would like to launch a specific folder. Like, okay, that doesn't really have much to do with what I'm talking about, but I'll hear it out. I'm not sure how to access arguments in JavaScript. I'm running Node, server.js, and then folder. And then he wants to access, or they, Grokify, want to access folder. They want to access that particular argument and use that folder in here. Now, even if I'm not necessarily sure if this thing is 100% related to my question, often the person asking the question isn't great at wording it, but somebody answering it might do a good job of rephrasing what's going on. So here, this person is saying, the standard method is that the arguments are stored in process.argv. Maybe that doesn't make any sense to me yet. And what this person's done is they've linked me to the documentation, and they've also given me a little snippet of text from the docs that explain what process.argv is. Process.argv is an array that contains all of the command line arguments. Right? The first element will be node. The second element will be the name of the JavaScript file, and then everything else will be put at the end of the array. The next elements will be any additional command line arguments. For example, if somebody calls node process2.js and then 1, 2, 3, 4, what we're going to print out is node, this, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Right? And I can take this person at their word, or I can actually play around with this code. And I'll take this and I'll bring this over into my sum.js. And it's just a little bit of code that I've pasted in. Maybe I don't even understand what it does right now. I could go in and just run it and see that it did something to the tune of what that person was saying. Right? Again, maybe I don't understand my code yet. That's fine. But I ended up seeing the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I put in. And say I do 5, 5, 5, 5. I see 5, 5, 5, 5. And I can play around with it with a bunch of different sizes of inputs and see that it works properly. Now, typically what I do when I've been given a bunch of code is I will strip it down to the most basic parts. Process.argv, for each, function, yada, yada, yada. I don't know what this stuff does. So I'm going to chop it off, maybe even just down to process. And I want to console.log what process is. I'm going to go ahead and just run node sum.js. And apparently This is process. It's a bunch of stuff. It's a bunch of stuff. Now, what does this, like, this is a thing called an object. Right? We're going to be learning about objects a lot over the course of this week. But generally, an object is a thing, and again, we're going to learn about this week, is a thing that I can go deep into and say argv to get something from inside. Now, I've heard this word process.argv. I want a console log to see what it is. I run it. And lo and behold, I end up getting this thing here, which is, it's an array, right? And as that person told me, the first thing here ends with the word node. So this here, the first thing in the array is the path to where node lives on your computer. Do we care about this right now? No. The second thing is some.js. Do I care about the name of my file? No. But everything else is the stuff that I care about. So I know that I can get all the arguments. I know I can get all the arguments by getting process.argv now. But I just want just the numbers. So starting from index, and what index would it be? From index 2. I want from index 2 downwards. Right? From index 2 to the end. Right? From index 2 to the end, I want just those numbers so that I could console log like just numbers and just see the numbers. Now, I might not know how to do this. There's going to be more than one solution. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and Google it again. Right, so I like to Google from google.com just so that you can see what I'm typing. Otherwise, it's like all the way up here. So google.com, I'll say, hey, Google, how do I get everything but the first two like elements of an array in JavaScript? What? Right? Is the fact that you can Google things as a question sort of illuminating? Like, you don't need to be particularly clever when you Google stuff. Right? I get a thing out. Now, this is purple, meaning I've clicked on this like a month ago. But I might want to explore what array prototype slice is. If I make my way further down, I will see W3 Schools. I will see Stack Overflow. I will see codinggame.com, which I don't really want to go to. Now, W3 Schools is great. I tend to like the Mozilla Developer Network more for a couple reasons. I like it because the color is like blue and soothing. I also tend to think that like the language that they use to like write things, I like the way that they explain stuff. But the Mozilla Developer Network is going to be your best friend for a while. The Mozilla Developer Network is a place where they've stored literally everything that has to do with JavaScript. Right? It's like your best documentation for JavaScript things. And in this case here, they're saying that there's a function called array.prototype.slice. What I want to do is get a part of an array. And if I make it to the Mozilla Developer Network, there's a couple things I can do to see if this page actually addresses the issue that I'm looking at. An MDN page is usually built up into like kind of 3 sections. The first top over here is going to have a short like spiel and a demo, a runnable demo, to quickly explain what this function or this thing is for. Then you make your way down and there's this freaky looking syntax thing. right? And the freaky looking syntax thing, which isn't actually as scary as it might seem at first, shows you mechanically how to actually use that function. And then when you make your way down, there's, I guess 4. There's a deeper description and examples of how to use it. Very extensive. And eventually you're going to find something that shows you exactly what you're looking for, hopefully. Now, I start with the spiel up at the top. It says, the slice method gives me a shallow copy, I don't know what that means, of a portion of an array. And that actually is starting to say what I'm looking for. Right? A portion of an array selected from beginning to end, without including that end. And here are some examples. If I have var animals being ant, bison, camel, duck, elephant, apparently when you go animal slice 2, I get camel, duck, and elephant. So it will have ignored ant and bison. And I can play around with this. I can go run, and it'll show me camel, duck, and elephant. And I can add more things to this array. Dog. And when I run, now I get bison, camel, duck, and elephant, because if I play around with this some more, I'll realize it ignored dog and ant. Right? What happens if I get rid of these, like just camel, duck, and elephant, and I run? With animal slice 2, I get just elephant. There's other ways for me to use this slicing, but maybe it's not useful for me right now. So right off the bat, I've been gifted this kind of solution, and I could even play around with it with something like closer to my thing that was node and then sum.js and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I run and I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm certain that this is working the way that I want it to. I'll generally then make my way down to the syntax and attempt to understand what this is saying. The way the syntax portion is written is it'll say, hey, in this case, when you have an array, you can go dot slice. In fact, if I look at the example here, it says animals dot slice. Right? So any array, I can go dot slice, and then these square brackets here in the syntax can be confusing until you scroll down and look at what the parameters mean. When something has square brackets around it, it means it's optional. So I can optionally give slice a beginning and optionally give it an end. If I don't give it an end, it's going to go all the way to the end of the array. So now that I know that, I could go, hey, var numbers is maybe process.argv.slice 2. And when I console log my numbers now, I just get 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. And I might play around with it in a couple different ways, and I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm pretty happy with that. This is a place where I'm actually pretty proud of myself, and I'll git add my sum.js, I'll git commit, get the numbers that are needed. I'm not actually doing anything with the numbers yet, but I'm getting them. And this also, I've noticed that this works with an unlimited number of numbers. Unlimited. What if I put in 0, node, sum.js, no numbers. Oh, whoops, not num. Node, sum.js, empty array. That's fine, I didn't put any numbers in, but it didn't break. So, without even intending to, what I did was, I did this part here. I set out to get like a number of command line arguments. I don't know, maybe 2 command line arguments, 1 command line argument. With really almost no work at all, I managed to get all of them. And that's something that you're going to find is you might solve a problem that you weren't even aiming to solve. Right? Now, I kind of forgot to make a point of me saying, hey, maybe I don't need to do unlimited number. Maybe I could do, takes in 3 command line arguments or whatever. But we'll continue playing around with this stuff in a minute. It is 9:58, which is when I like to take a break. Are there questions so far? Is the pace like glacial enough? Like, are you bored? No? Okay. But again, if you want me to speed up or slow down, just let me know. The thing is, after this break, we're gonna speed up a little bit, right? We're gonna jump into writing some loops and stuff and knock out the rest of this thing here. Mhm. Right. So a shallow array, what this is gonna mean is basically like if I have, it's a good question. Like, so if I happen to have var sum array. Okay, this might go over people's heads, and I just want you to ignore it if it does. Like, say my animals here is node sum.js and then sum array, where sum array is pointing to 1, 2, 3. What a shallow copy means is that when you get a new array, that new array is pointing to that other item. It's not that it made a whole new copy of it like that. Does that make sense? Right? It's not a crucial idea right now at all, so I don't want you to worry about that. But I just didn't want to like hand wave your question. Right? So it just means this: like instead of doing this, this is a shallow array. Shallow copy, and this here is what we'll call like a deep copy. Right. Cool. Yes. Yeah. But you'll be exploring this kind of stuff deeper over the course of like the next 2 weeks. Though. Any other questions? So what we'll do is we'll take a 10-minute break. At 10:11, we'll pick up again, maybe 10:12. Yeah. Mm-hmm. or like a K-pop star. All right, so when we had left off, what we'd ended up with was broken up. What we'd ended up with was some code that gets us just the numbers and console logs them. And I'd ended up on the very happy note of, let me close this, on the very happy note of, woo, I see the numbers printed out. And good stuff. What we want to do now is make our way down the list of things that we need to do, which is eventually print out the sum. Print out the sum. Now, the way that I like to do something like this is, I know it says go through each and the rest of it, but I know that eventually I'm going to need a sum. So for coding purposes, like I'll start often by just going var sum, and then I'll start it at something. Maybe 0. 0 feels like the logical place to start summing. And then eventually I want to console.log sum. Right? That's what I want to end up with, is I want to end up with the sum printed out. And when I run node sum.js now on any number or any list of numbers, I get 0 out every time. That's okay. I know that I've managed to grab just the numbers. I'm just not console logging them right now. I toggled that off. And what I want to do is go through each number and maybe add them together. Right? So if I have my numbers being, like, for example, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I need to start and take 1 and put it in my sum. And then take 2 and add it to my sum. And then take 3 and add it to my sum. Right? Now I won't be writing it out like this, but this is mechanically what's going to happen. I need to sum these up bit by bit. What kind of structure am I going to need to go through this array? A for loop. Right? I'm going to need a for loop. Over time, you're going to start associating various phrases with different like programming constructs or concepts. Right? So right now, I'm seeing this thing saying goes through each. And goes through each. I'll tell you that through every time you see this, you should be thinking for loop. You're going to start seeing words like check, right? Or like decide. What kind of construct do you think I might need when I see the word check? If statement, right? Now this stuff might not seem like immediately clear to you, right? If you make yourself a cheat sheet of these terms and these concepts, I think that's a good place to start. You can translate any direction that you want to give to something. Any one of these directions can be translated to these various programming concepts. It can be tough for people sometimes to learn new concepts, like learn a for loop or learn a function. Just learn what that means. But if you take that programming concept and tie it back to as a person trying to direct somebody else to do something, right? These programming concepts become a lot clearer. So a for loop is a construct in a language that's specifically used for going through things. It solves that problem. So if I want to go through each of these numbers, I'll need a for loop. Then it'll go for. And this happens to be the syntax for a for loop. For, and then parentheses, and I'm going to write a bunch of stuff in here, and then curly braces. Now, I also want to say, don't stress yourself out trying to get syntax right every time. You can make a cheat sheet of syntax. That's fine. If you want to, on Post-it notes, write what a basic for loop looks like and what a basic if statement looks like and all that, and just keep that next to your laptop, that's cool, right? I think that's a great idea. What do you think I have in my notebook? Right? It's okay to make yourself cheat sheets, and you'll like learn this stuff over time. If I want to make a for loop, what do I write in here? What kind of stuff goes into the parentheses for a for loop? Yeah, where I want to start, and what does the syntax look like? Yeah. I var I equals 0. And this is saying start I, this number I, I'm going to start it at 0. And then I can say I is less than, and then what do I put here? Yeah, the maximum of what I want to hit. So if I did 10, for example, then I'd be going from 0 all the way, but not including 10. If I go I++. So a for loop, and we're going to look at, like later on, we're going to learn kind of more intuitive standards for for loops. A for loop's built up of kind of 4 sections to it. The first one is, what is my number going to be? I, and I'm starting it at 0. This is saying keep running whatever code I write in here, whatever code goes in here, keep running it as long as I is less than 10. And this part here says, every time you run the code, increase I by 1. It's almost like just too much in terms of stuff that it's saying. But when you get comfortable with the pattern of this is going to get me I being 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? That's all that you technically need to know about this for loop at the moment. I'm going to go console.log I in here. And when I run this right now, I'm going to get every number from 0 all the way out to 9. And then 0, because I said down at the bottom, console log the sum, which is 0. Now, this loop, I don't want it to loop all the way up to 10. I want it to loop however many numbers there are. How do I do that? Pardon? Yeah, length of what? So I'm going to have to say numbers.length. Right? So this is going to count however many numbers there are. And when I run this now, and I go node sum 1, 2, 3, what I get printed out is 0, 1, 2. Node sum 1, 2, 3, 4, and then however many numbers I want. It's going to print however many numbers there are. So in this case, there were 11. So it printed 0, 1, 2, 3, 10. So 11 numbers. So now this loop here is smart. It's looping only as many times as it needs to. What I want to do here to start off with is I want to print out the particular number at that point. Right. This is just something that I'm going to do for myself. I'm going to console log this to see if I can print out every number. Right. So see right now I'm printing out 0, 1, 2, 3 and all that. I want to print out 777 instead of 0, 1, 2. Right. Or 752. 775 2. What do I do here to make that happen? I have to index it, right? What am I indexing? So how am I going to write it in here? Brackets. You need to be more explicit than that to me. Numbers, brackets, and then I is inside of the brackets, right? This is the array. This is saying, get me something inside of the array. And this is saying, get me the ith thing in the array. Right? When I run this now, I get 7, 75, and 2. And this is good for me because I know now that every one of these, the particular number is, always forget my semicolons. The particular number is numbers I. I really, really like making myself variables all the time. Right? Anytime I want to give something a name, I'm going to make a variable for it. Right? A variable is kind of like how when you think of something, you're able to keep something in your head. If you want your program to keep something in its head, it needs to have a variable. Right? That's what a variable is. It's saying, keep that in mind for a sec. So the particular number is numbers I, and what I want to do is I want to increase sum by numbers I, or by the particular number. What do I do? Sum plus the particular number. And now when I run this, I still get 0 out. Right? Why is that? Pardon? I need to store this new value. I'm going to see that sum, this is like 0 at the moment, and the particular number might be some number. I want to take that sum and put it back into that original sum box. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to say, hey, sum is going to be whatever it currently is plus the particular number. What I'll see now, when I run this, let's do 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh no. Oh no. I mean, it's heading somewhere. It's not necessarily entirely wrong. You know. 0, 3, 4. We broke math. What's going on? What's that? The string, right? That might be the situation. What I'm noticing is that these numbers aren't being added up the way I expected them to. Instead, the thing that I get out is by me playing around with it, I've realized that it's actually just joining all of the numbers together. Right? It's just joining them together. And I might think that it might have something to do with it being not a particular type. For example, if I hop into node, did you know you can just write node like this and go enter? Right? When I do this, it takes me into the term, like the node REPL, the read, evaluate, print, loop, where I can just do math. 1 plus 1, 2, great. 1 plus 4 plus 7, or 7, it's 12, awesome. If I do hello plus world, I get hello world. And if I do 1 plus 2, I get 12, right? So it looks like maybe that's what's going on here. When I have 0 plus 1, for example, I get 0, 1. I can explore this a little bit further and find out that when I go type of 3, type of is a thing in JavaScript that prints out or gives you what type something is. So 3 is a number, but when I say type of 3, I get a string. Right? So it's what you said there, like maybe it's a string. I could even explore this by going, hey, console.log, the type of the particular number. Right? Let's just see what it is. And when I run this now, I get string, string, string. So yes, it looks like that's the issue here. Right? Now I have to pull myself back and really go into the minutia of what's going on. I will typically console log the heck out of my programs. I want to make a point here. Most of the places where you run into bugs, right? Most of the places where you're going to be running into bugs are where your code is opaque to you, right? Where you're not seeing what's actually happening underneath. Because the thing is, to me, it looked like I was just summing numbers because it wasn't obvious that this is a string. There's nothing in here that's telling me the particular number is a string. And what you're going to need to do to avoid bugs or to figure out what a bug is make the code more transparent to yourself. There's a couple ways that you can do this. One way is to break things into variables, right? Breaking things into steps. Another thing that I can do is write a lot of comments out for myself, right? Telling myself what's actually going on, because then I can identify, hey, does my code actually do what the comment says it should do? And then the most important thing that I recommend doing is console logging all the time. Console log is going to be your like X-ray goggles into your code, right? Notice if I have no console log anywhere and I run my program, I don't know if it worked or not. I have no idea. I could say, hey, this program works perfectly. I have no idea because I don't have a console log. And even if I have one console log at the end, I don't actually know what's going on in the middle. So I will typically like pepper my program with console log statements, and you can toggle these on and off as you see fit to give yourself more clarity into what's going on. And console log is going to be your most useful tool right now. Right? So again, bugs show up when your code is opaque, right? When it's not clear to you what's going on inside. So make it more transparent. Right? I have a couple other, well, it's basically just this idea, but expanded upon in the notes that I'm going to give you. But genuinely, console log a bunch of stuff. So what I see now is that the particular number is actually a string, right? Make it a number. So I'm going to rename this thing to the particular number string, just to give myself a more descriptive name here. And I want the particular number to be something like that. Now my question here is, back to google.com. Hey again, Google. How do I make a string into a number in JavaScript? Thanks again. All right. And how to convert a string to a number in JavaScript. Sure, it's by Flavio Copes. Like, maybe not the best place to go. Convert a string to an integer in JavaScript. And I'll play around with this. Because it's Stack Overflow. That's usually where I tend to go. Notice again, I can write as much stuff in here as I want, and it'll still work out. Convert a number to a string. The simplest way would be to use the native number function. Apparently, if I wrap number around the thing, and I could play around with this in Node, I could say, hey, number. Well, let's go 1 plus 2 like that gives me 12, but 1 plus number 2 gives me 3. Right? I've played around with it a little bit. I'm convinced that this is good. And I can take that and I can put this in here and I go number the particular number string. So now the particular number is probably the actual number. You know, node sum 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, expecting 15. What? Expecting 6 maybe? What? I go and I get my original inputs and outputs. Like let's not do these ones because I haven't handled negatives and like whole numbers yet, but let me try 2, 2, 5 and 10, 12, 5. So 2, 2, 5 got me 9, which is what I expected. 10, 12, 5 got me 27. Again, it's what I expected, so that's great. So I might have actually solved this problem for the whole numbers right now. And the thing that I needed to do was make sure that my number wasn't a string. Right? Does this make sense? Right? And again, Googling is a big part of this. Googling is a huge part of this. I don't need to just like pull things out of my head with these little pieces, right? With the little pieces, these are the things that are useful to Google. I didn't Google right from the bat the problem statement. Like, that's cheating. If I take this and I'm like, hey, Google, write a program that takes an unlimited number of whatever, like, that would have been cheating. But the little chunks of the programming language, I can Google that stuff. Now I'm going to go here and I'm going to commit, make it work for whole numbers. And another thing that I might want to do now is test out to see how it works for the other cases, right? So actually in my checklist here, I did goes through each, prints out the sum. Now I forgot to do this early on, but when you break this stuff up, by reading this thing where it says write a node program, take an unlimited number of command line arguments, go through each and print out the sum, this stuff here feels like core functionality, right? It feels like the core stuff that I need to make work. When it says skip any non-whole numbers, my first reaction as like a student doing this assignment is like, what if I don't? Look, what if I don't? Do support negative numbers. What if I don't? Sue me, right? Like I'm not gonna do it. It's totally fine. You can say, hey, you know what? This is extra. This is like extra tacked on. This is your like automatic roll down windows or whatever. This is your sports car. Right? This is your Toyota Matrix with the crank windows. Right? So now that I have this stuff sorted out, like maybe I'll see if the stuff here works. So skip any non-whole numbers. Well, let's see what happens when I do node sum of 10, 0.5, and 7. Unfortunately, I get 17.5. Hey, it's a feature. It works for non-whole numbers. Maybe not. Maybe that's the thing I have to figure out. We can try out with negative numbers, 10, minus 5, and 2. And I got 7. I wasn't even aiming to get the negative numbers to work. But it happened, right? It's just a happy accident. These things happen sometimes, right? You will accidentally solve a problem that like you weren't even aiming to solve. Notice that nowhere in my process did I try to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to try and also make this work for negatives and yada, 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 right? I just work my way forward, right? Don't get too anxious about all the bells and whistles. So, you know, happy surprise. It works for negatives as well. Now, we can do a couple things at this point. I can dive into making this work for removing non-whole numbers, right? Skipping non-whole numbers. I could do that. If I say something to the tune of check to see if a number is whole, what kind of like programming construct do you think we're going to need? An if statement, right? We're going to need an if statement. I'm going to say right now that I leave it as an exercise to the student. Have you ever read like those math textbooks where they'll like have a whole thing and then we leave it as an exercise to the student to figure out how to skip non-whole numbers? Right? I'll say that it'll live somewhere in here. Right. Yep.
So, like, let's say not this form, like, we have to look up, oh, how do I check for the whole number? Should we ask that to Google, or should we just find something that, or should we be Googling stuff that lets us?
I mean,
Googling the function, or should we be Googling the question?
I guess, like, I like to Google things like check whole number JavaScript, right? Like I will eventually, like you'll be writing stuff like this. You can start now if you want, but I just find when you first start programming or when you first start working with something, you don't like know exactly what you're dealing with. So I'll phrase it as like verbosely as possible and then start shaving things down. But apparently like, oh, there's an isInteger method. Maybe I didn't know that the method would have been called isInteger, so there's no real way that I would have gone JavaScript isInteger. Right? I just wouldn't have known to look for that. If I've worked with JavaScript for a long time and I know about the isInteger function, and then I move over to another language like Ruby, I might do that. Like I might say, hey, Ruby, does Ruby have an isInteger function? Right? But that's because like I have prior knowledge. Right? For right now, like I would just recommend Googling how to do a particular thing, because it might be made up of one function or it might be made up of many functions. Right? Like it might be multiple steps. So right now, you can go ahead and Google something like check whole number to see, hey, is it a whole number or not, and then decide to sum it or not. Now, I want to leave that as an exercise to you, but what I want to talk about at the moment is cleaning my code, right? Making sure that I'm writing nice, clean code. The first thing that you're going to want to do when you submit a project, right, or you submit an assignment yourself is get rid of any unnecessary comments. Right? I don't need to say go through each for loop exclamation mark. I can get rid of this. Right? Now, I'm going to leave these comments in here because I think they're like instructive. But over in another one that I'm going to call some clean.js, just in another file, I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of any of the comments that aren't really very useful. Right? This comment here that says, whoops, make it a number. You could say that it's useful because it's explaining to me as a developer, right, or maybe as a person who hasn't seen this code before, that I need to translate this thing to a number. But I've also just, like, I've made this variable named nicely. So this comment here is just extra noise because this says the particular number string. So I don't really need this. If you find that a comment helps you though, don't get too trigger happy. Like you can keep comments in. Okay. I don't need these console logs. I don't need this happy surprise. Right? This see if it's whole or not for the student. I've left that in there for you to fill in. Right? But generally you'll go through and you'll remove any comments that you don't need. Another thing that I might do is look at how I can make this like shorter or snappier. For example, there's a way that I can make this a bit shorter. Does anyone know how I could shorten this? With a plus equals, right? I could go sum plus equals the particular number. Right? This is a thing that I'm allowed to do, and this here is just shorthand for that. Right? If you're not comfortable with the syntax, which I'm just saying is just shorthand for this, if you're not comfortable with it, don't feel like you need to use it. So that's one thing that I might do. Another thing that I might do, and I don't want you to understand this right now, is the fact that when I'm looping through everything, there is a separate kind of for loop that I could use. We're going to explore this like early next week, but I just think it'd be fun for you to just know about this. You can replace this thing here with for var number in numbers. Or we'll just say for var I in numbers. So this here can be turned to var I in numbers. And what this is just a special kind of for loop where you don't need to worry about the plus plus and the equals 0 and the number's length and whatever. This just says go through every number. Right? This happens to be nice and convenient. And when I go node sum clean, it still works. So this is called a for in. Right, a for in. Might be something useful for you to play around with. Any questions about this so far? So I don't suggest doing that like cleaning process right at the beginning or forcing yourself to write like beautiful code right off the bat, right? Give yourself time to write ugly code. That's okay. And then go through and clean it up, right? Maybe once in a while, and just clean out any dirt. And it'll make it a little bit easier to understand what's kind of going on. The last thing that I want to talk about is a little bit deeper into debugging. Actually, I forgot to say iteratively. So we've seen me work incrementally at this point. Does incrementally make sense now at this point? Right? What iteratively is going to mean is now that I have my code working for positive numbers and negative numbers, I realize that I've hit those cases, but I haven't hit the case of skipping non-whole numbers. I have a solution. It's just not complete. Right? It's been built up and it's just not complete. I have to go over it again and now find out where I can put those if statements. And that's what iteration is going to mean. Is I go through that process again and figure out where do I put in these extra little bits. So I said I wanted to show you something extra for debugging, and this is totally extra, like very extra. I want to stress that this is not like, this is stretch. This isn't something that you're supposed to be doing. It'll just maybe be fun to play around with. So Node has a particular tool that lets you run your code line by line. It's called a debugger. If I, in any place in my code here, like at here, I go debugger. Right, so on any line, I can write debugger. And when I run my program now, so that was, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, nothing special happens unless I run node debug. Some JS, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I put the word debug in there, oh, my bad. Node inspect is the current best way. They both do the same thing. Node inspect. There you go. If I run node inspect, it puts me in this like fairly ugly situation here. I'm going to run the word cont. And what I see here is lines like 2, 3, and then 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 happens to be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They happen to be the lines of code that I wrote. And the code is just stopped. And what I can do now is I can run line by line by line by going next, next, next. And it'll run bit by bit. Every time I go next, the code will just tick forward a little bit. Right? And I can use this to see if my code's actually executing the way that I want it to. Right? You can use it to see if it's actually doing the stuff that I want it to do. Now, when I'm in the debugger, like I might find out that the code's not going in a place that I intended for it to go. Right? This is like a beasted up version of a console log. When I get bored with it, I can go cont and it'll just continue until it hits the next debugger point. Right? So when we write debugger, this thing is called a breakpoint. It's where the code breaks and stops. Now, the reason that I might want to do something like this is because if I put a debugger statement that I break at, I can actually hop into my code and mess around with it while it's running. Just kind of bananas. If I run REPL, so I wrote REPL. REPL is going to put me in a REPL where I actually have access to the node REPL, right? I have access to the node REPL. I can do anything I want, including playing around with the code here. So I'm in this point right now. Like I'm right here, meaning I have access to the variable numbers. I have access to the variable sum. So I can say, hey, what is sum? Oh, it's 0. But I could get funky with it and I could say, hey, sum is 12. And just change the value of sum on a whim. Then exit the debugger with Control C. And continue. And I'm going to see that my final sum was 22 instead of 10. Right? So I can mess with things. I want to say right now, I want to be really, really clear. I don't want you to play with the debugger. I don't want you to do this. I'm showing it to you as a thing of like, in the future, like beyond bootcamp, you'll be playing around with tools like this that let you actually play with the code while it's running, right? And when I'm saying that like we use console log statements to give us like X-ray vision into our code, to make code more transparent, this debugger thing is that next kind of like logical step. Like I want to be able to see my code as it's running, as opposed to just run it and cross my fingers and say, oh, like I hope it works, right? So again, you shouldn't use the debugger right now. What you can take a look at is a thing called JavaScript tutor. I'll just let you Google this right now and play around with it if you want. JavaScript tutor. We're going to be spending the breakout at 3 p.m. today playing with this tool, right? So you will see this in a lecture. I'm not just hand waving it and moving on. Are there any questions? Cool. So it's 10:51. Pretty close to the end here. To kind of bring things back and let you go, I had said in the original kind of starting bit that we'd have a brief discussion on Markdown. We had a brief discussion on Markdown, and that we would code iteratively and incrementally. What we've done is one iteration, right? Or technically multiple iterations. We did the console log just 15, then we did console log the sum being 0, and then we put for loops, where we're going over the same problem multiple times and just making it better and better every time. And we also worked incrementally, meaning we were adding little bits. We've learned a bit about how to debug, right? Main thing for debugging is console log everything. Manually testing code is going to mean what we did here, which is come up with some example inputs or make your own inputs and test them. Right? Manually test that stuff. And then we talked about writing clean code, which happens at the end, right? It happens at the end. You take out any bad console log statements, right? You remove anything that's not being used. And maybe if you know some extra tricks, for making things shorter, like you can do that. But you don't need to do this. That's about it as far as what I want to force you to learn today, or rather for lecture. Keep in mind, again, the recommendations that I gave you for how to Google things or how to research things. That will be in the notes that I'll send out for you. Right. Cool. Are there any questions?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The example you showed for bar I numbers, is that pretty standard? Like as you get professional, the way, or is it just case by case?
Well, see, this for loop up here, this style here, is cool because it lets me do things like this. Like, Like, I could work on a loop downwards. I think you had to do something like this in the prep course, right? You can't do that with this for loop. This is like one very special case of just this kind of for loop, right? Just when you go from 0 to a number plus plus, like that's the only case. The other thing that like this for loop here can't do is, right? This for loop here is going up by 2s every time, right? So while this style of for loop is more configurable, it tends to be really confusing for people, right? It tends to be really confusing. So if you're talking about just the case where I need to go through everything, then you might as well use this kind right here, right? But again, we'll be playing around with this over the course of the next 2 weeks. Right. Good question. Any other questions? Well, did you find this like a useful time? Sweet. I mean, my feelings won't be hurt. You can send feedback. That's cool. The other thing that I want to remind you of is remember to make heavy use of mentors. Make assistance requests, even when you feel like you fully understand something. It's still worthwhile to have somebody do a code review, right? So if you want to ask somebody to just look at your code once you're done, that's cool as well. We're happy to do that. Sweet. Have a great rest of the day until, I guess, 3 when we're together again. And when we get together, we're going to be in that room. We'll go over scopes in JavaScript. Great. Peace.